The studio lights were bright that afternoon, so bright they almost made the air feel warmer. The audience in Ellen's talk show laughed easily at her opening jokes. There was a lightness in the air, a rhythm to her voice that kept people relaxed. But under that comfort, a single moment was about to shift. Every KeanuReeves sat in the guest chair, his posture relaxed, yet guarded. He wore a simple black shirt and jeans, his hair falling slightly over his forehead. There was no flashiness, no loud designer brands, just Keanu being himself. He had been invited to talk about his latest movie, but it was never just about the movie on these shows. Ellen leaned in with her easy smile, a smile that had often turned into something sharper. "So, Keanu," she said, "is it true that you ride the subway?" Her voice carried a note of amusement, the kind that told the audience they should find this funny. People in the crowd chuckled lightly. Camera zoomed in, waiting for his reaction. Keanu smiled faintly, a calm curve of his lips. "Yeah," he said, his tone as soft as if he were telling a friend where he had breakfast. "I take it when I can. It's simple. It gets me where I need to go." Ellen raised her eyebrows. "One of the movie star, one of the biggest names in Hollywood? You can afford any car, any driver. Why squeeze into a crowded train with strangers?" Her voice danced between curiosity and mockery. The audience laughed louder this time. Sensing the question was meant to poke, Keanu didn't flinch. His eyes moved over the crowd, not with challenge, but with a kind of patience. "Because those strangers," he said slowly, "are people. People with lives and stories. When I ride with them, I'm reminded of the world I live in, not just the bubble I work in." His voice was steady, but there was a weight behind it, something the laughter could not Aracelen gave a short laugh. "But you could avoid all that noise, all those delays. You don't have to deal with it." He tilted his head slightly as if considering her words. "Sometimes the things we avoid," he said, "are the very things that keep us human." The audience quieted just a little. It wasn't the punchline they expected. A few people even nodded. Ellen shifted in her seat, the smile still there but a little tighter now. She tried to bring the humor back. "So what do people do when they see you there? Do they freak out? Ask for autographs?" Keanu gave a small shrug. "Sometimes they smile. Sometimes they leave me alone. Once, a young woman fell asleep leaning against me. She looked so tired. I didn't wake her. When she realized later, she apologized. I told her she didn't need to." He paused, the memory softening his voice. "That moment reminded me that we all carry something heavy sometimes, and maybe what we need is just a little space to rest." The crowd was quieter now, listening. Ellen's attempt to make it a joke had turned into something different. The story painted a picture of a man sitting in a crowded train, quietly holding space for a stranger's exhaustion. It wasn't glamorous, but it was human, and that was the kind of story that stayed with people. Linked, regrouping. "Well, I guess you do see the world differently," she said. Her tone had lost some of its earlier sharpness. Keanu leaned forward just slightly, his hands resting on his knees. "I just think," he said gently, "if we only live above the world, we forget what it feels like to be in it." Someone in the audience clapped, then another. Soon, the whole crowd joined in, not the loud, rowdy applause for a joke, but a slower, more thoughtful kind. Ellen smiled again, this time with a trace of respect. She moved on to the next topic, but the energy in the room had shifted, behind the cameras. A crew member whispered to another, "He just changed the whole vibe." And maybe he had, not by arguing, not by getting defensive, but by standing so quietly in who he was that no one could move him. That was Keanu rooted, steady, unshaken, even when the lights were bright and the laughter was meant to cuten. This was only the beginning of how his quiet response would ripple far beyond that studio asterisk. The clip from the show aired that same evening. At first, it looked like any other celebrity interview, bright colors, quick cuts, bursts of audience laughter. But when it reached the moment Keanu spoke about the subway, the tone shifted even through the television screen. Watching at home leaned forward. His calm words and gentle voice cut through the noise of the day like a still pond in the middle of traffic. The next morning, the internet was buzzing. Social media filled with short edits of the moment.
Oh.
Someone had slowed the part where he said, "Sometimes the things we avoid are the very things that keep us human," and it was being shared like a quote from a book. In the comments, people wrote their own stories about kindness on public transport, about strangers helping them carry heavy bags, about quiet nods exchanged in the morning rush. Keanu's single quotes, "As team had not planned this." There was no marketing strategy, no calculated image play. It was just him speaking from his truth. Yet the response was bigger than most movie promotions. People weren't just praising him, they were questioning themselves. Why did they avoid sitting with strangers? When had they last looked someone in the eye instead of at their phone? Ellen's team noticed too. By noon, producers were discussing the unexpected reaction. One of them admitted, "We thought it would be a funny little bit, but he turned it into something real." Another said, "That's his gift, he makes you think without making you feel judged." Meanwhile, Keanu was walking down a quiet street in New York City. The subway entrance was just ahead. He carried a small backpack, wearing a plain hoodie. Light drizzle made the pavement shine. As he stepped onto the train platform, a young man in a worn denim jacket approached him. Hesitantly, "Hey, are you?" The young man's voice trailed off. Keanu gave a warm nod. "Yeah. How's your day going?" The man smiled awkwardly. "I saw you on Ellen yesterday. I just wanted to say thanks. I've been avoiding the subway for months. Too many people, too much noise. But today I thought, maybe it's not all bad. Maybe I just need to see it differently." Keanu listened closely, his eyes steady on the young man's. "There's a lot in this city that can feel heavy," he said. "But sometimes the small moments here, they remind you you're not alone." The train arrived. They both stepped. And Keanu didn't choose the empty corner. He stood among a group of strangers, one hand on the metal pole. The young man found a seat nearby. And then it happened again, those unplanned human moments. An elderly woman struggled to hold on to her shopping bag. Keanu reached over, holding it steady until the train slowed at the next stop. She didn't even realize who he was, only that a kind stranger was helping her. A few feet away, a teenage girl took a photo secretly, then hesitated. She finally walked over and said softly, "I'm sorry, I just wanted a picture. My mom loves you. She's in the hospital right now." Keanu smiled gently and handed her his phone. "Let's take one for her," he said. "When the photo is taken," he added, "tell her she's in my thoughts. Tell her I hope she feels better soon." That night, the girl posted the photo with a caption about how he had made her mom smile from a hospital bed. It spread just like the Ellen clip, not because he was famous, but because he was real. Ellen's publicist called Keanu's team too. Days later, "Ellen wants you back on the show." Response has been huge. But Keanu wasn't interested in fame boosts. He told his manager, "If I go back, it's only if it's for something that matters." He didn't explain what he meant yet, but he already had an idea forming in his mind. Something that would take the quiet respect from that subway moment and turn it into something much larger and soon. That idea would take him back on national television, not as the guest being teased, but as the man who would change the tone of the entire room again. Days passed, but the reaction to Keanu's interview didn't fade, it grew. News outlets began replaying the segment, not for gossip or scandal, but as an example of how humility could disarm even the sharpest jokes. Headlines read things like, "Keanu turns subway question into life lesson," and "the power of a quiet answer." Keanu noticed the shift when strangers approached him, not just to ask for autographs, but to share pieces of their lives. A nurse told him she started smiling at patients' families in the hospital hallway instead of rushing past. A construction worker said he started talking to his neighbors on the train instead of wearing headphones. It was as if his small story had planted seeds in people's hearts. Then one afternoon, his phone buzzed with a call from Ellen's producer. "Keanu, Ellen wants to invite you again," the voice said. "But this time, she wants to do something different. She said she owes you a better conversation." Keanu sat in silence for a moment, leaning back in his chair. "What does different mean?" "She didn't say exactly," the producer replied, "but she sounded genuine. Not like the usual bits." Keanu thought of the young man on the subway, the teenage girl whose mother was in the hospital, and the elderly woman with the heavy shopping bag. He thought of how those moments felt more important than any scripted promotion. "All right," he said. "I'll go. But I want to bring something with me." When the day came, the studio atmosphere was different. The laughter was still there, but softer, somehow less sharp. Ellen greeted Keanu with a hug that lingered a second longer than usual. "Keanu," she said, "last time you were here, you really got people thinking. I didn't expect that. I guess I should thank you for changing the tone on my own show." Keanu gave a small smile. "Sometimes the tone changes because it needs to." Ellen leaned in, curious. "So, what did you bring?" He reached down beside his chair and lifted a simple canvas bag. From it, he pulled out a worn leather notebook. "This," he said, "is full of notes from people I met on the subway after our last conversation. I asked them to write down one thing they wish the world remembered about them. Not their names, not their jobs, just something they want to be seen for." Len took the notebook, flipping through pages filled with different handwriting. 1. "Read, I want people to know I'm trying to be a good father, even though I'm still figuring it out." Another said, "I'm not lazy, I'm just tired because I work 2 jobs." Ellen's face softened. "These are beautiful, they're real." Keanu nodded. "We walk past so many people every day. We see them for a second, and we think we know them. But we don't. Every seat on the subway is a whole life we don't see." The audience was silent, hanging on his words. Ellen closed the notebook and set it on the table between them. "Keanu," she said slowly, "I think you just gave me my most important moment on this show in years." Keanu looked out at the audience. Maybe it's not about the subway. Maybe it's about remembering we're all riding through the same city, the same life, just trying to get somewhere. Right. The applause was different this time, steady, heartfelt, without the quick punch of a comedy beat. And somewhere, far beyond the studio lights, people who watched at home would remember that simple truth when they stepped into a crowded train or bus tomorrow. But for Keanu, the night wasn't over. Backstage, a producer handed him a folded note left by an audience member. It read, "I came here thinking life is hopeless. Your words reminded me that strangers can still care. Thank you." Keanu folded the note carefully and slipped it into his pocket. He didn't know it yet, but that single message would lead to an encounter that would test his own beliefs about kindness in a way he had never faced before. Asterisk. The note from the audience member stayed in Keanu's pocket for days. He would take it out sometimes when the city felt too loud, or when he found himself wondering if his words ever truly mattered. The handwriting was neat but a little shaky, and the message had been written with the kind of honesty that only comes when someone has nothing left to losey a week after the Ellen show. Keanu was walking near Union Square in New York. The winter. Wind cut through his coat, and people hurried past with their heads down. He spotted a small bookstore tucked between 2 tall buildings. Something about its dimly lit window made him step inside. The warm air smelled of paper and coffee. There were no bright signs, no music, just the soft shuffle of pages and the sound of a man behind the counter greeting customers quietly. Keanu wandered toward a back corner, running his fingers along the spines of old novels. That was when he heard a voice, faint but familiar. Mr. Reeves. He turned to see a young woman standing a few feet away, holding a book against her chest. Her face was pale, her eyes tired. Then he realized she was the one from the note. "You were at the show," he said gently. She nodded. "I didn't think you'd read my message. I was having a bad week, actually, a bad year." She gave a weak laugh. "I've been alone a long time. Hearing you talk about strangers caring, it felt like someone was reminding me not to disappear." Keanu stepped closer, his expression calm but focused. "You're still here," he said quietly. "That means something." They talked for a few minutes in the quiet aisle. She told him about working nights at a diner, about her father passing away last year, about how the subway felt like the loneliest place in the world, even though it was always full. When she finished, Keanu reached into his bag and pulled out the leather notebook. "I've been collecting more stories," he said. Maybe you could add yours. It's not the whole thing, just one truth you want the world to remember. She hesitated, then wrote slowly. Sometimes the smallest kindness can be the only reason someone stays. Keanu read it, his chest tightening. That's the kind of truth people need to see, he told her. Do you be okay if I shared it? On the show next time I'm on? Her eyes widened. Really? You'd do that? It's not my story, he said. It's ours. They parted ways with a quiet goodbye, but the meeting stayed with him. That night, Keanu called Ellen's producer and said, Next time, I want to read something on air, not mind someone else's words. But they matter. A few days later, the young woman messaged him to say she had taken the subway for the first time in months and ended up talking to an elderly man about his life. I think I'm starting to see it the way you do, she wrote. Keanu smiled at the message. He didn't think of himself as a savior or a teacher, just someone trying to remind people that connection still existed. But he knew one thing, sometimes. You have to protect the smallest sparks of hope until they can light something bigger and soon. An unexpected event in the subway itself would put that belief to the test in front of dozens of strangers, some skeptical, some hostile, and one person whose life was about to change forever. It was late afternoon when Keanu stepped onto the subway platform again. The winter sky above was a pale gray, and the wind followed him down the stairs like a restless shadow. The station was busy, but not packed commuters moving with that tired rhythm of people who just wanted to get home. He carried the leather notebook in his bag, its pages now heavy with handwritten truths from strangers. Some were joyful, some were filled with pain, but all of them were real. He was on his way to meet a friend for dinner when the sound of raised voices broke through the usual clatter of the station. At the far end of the platform, a tall man in a dark coat stood over an older passenger, man with worn gloves and a bent back. The older man's grocery bag had spilled, oranges rolling across the tiles. Watch where you're going, old man, the tall man snapped. The older passenger muttered an apology, bending slowly to pick up the fruit. The tall man laughed sharply. Yeah, bow down. Maybe that's all you're good for. A few people glanced over, but kept walking. No one wanted to get involved. Keanu started moving toward them without thinking. His footsteps were steady, not rushed, but there was a weight in each step. When he reached them, he knelt beside the older man and began picking up the scattered oranges. Here, Keanu said, his voice calm. Let me help you. The tall man frowned. Mind your own business? Keanu straightened, holding the bag out to the older man. Then he turned to the tall stranger. This is my business, he said quietly, because kindness is everyone's business. The man scoffed. Oh, what? You think you're better than me because you're, what, famous? Or something. Keanu's voice stayed even. Hey, no. I just think if you've got the strength to stand over someone, you've got the strength to help them up. A hush settled over the people nearby. A woman pulled out her phone to record. Tall man shifted uncomfortably under the attention, muttered something under his breath, and walked away. The older passenger looked at Keanu with a faint smile. Thank you, son. People don't usually bother. Keanu handed him the bag and shook his head. They should. When the train arrived, Keanu stepped on and found himself surrounded by quiet glances. A young boy tugged at his mother's sleeve and whispered, That's the man from the TV. She gave Keanu a grateful nod. He took a seat and opened the leather notebook. On the next blank page, he wrote, Today, a man spilled his groceries. Another man tried to step over him. I decided to stop. Sometimes all it takes to change the moment is to kneel instead of look away. When the train stopped at the next station, a teenage boy sitting across from him spoke up. Hey, what you said back there, about helping people up. My brother needs to hear that. He thinks no one cares. Keanu tore a small sheet from the notebook, wrote the line again, and handed it to him. Then tell him someone does. The train pulled away, carrying with it the weight of a moment most people would have forgotten, except for those who had seen it. But Keanu didn't know that one of those witnesses would be waiting for him the next day, ready to tell him a story that would turn his quiet subway moments into something much bigger than he ever planned. Asterisk the next morning. Keanu walked into the same small bookstore he had visited before. The bell above the door chimed softly, and the scent of coffee, an old paper, welcomed him. He wasn't there for books this time. He had arranged to meet someone who had left a message for him through the store owner at a corner table sat a man in his late 30s, wearing a faded jacket and a baseball cap pulled low. When he saw Keanu, he stood awkwardly, as if unsure how to begin. "You don't know me," the man said, "but I was on the platform yesterday. I saw you help that older guy." Keanu nodded, pulling out a chair. "Sit, tell me." The man hesitated, then leaned forward. I was the one who didn't move. I saw what happened and I just froze. Part of me thought, it's not my problem. Another part knew I should do something, but I didn't. Then you stepped in. It messed with me all night. I kept thinking, why didn't I help? Keanu listened without interrupting. The man's voice tightened. So I went home and I told my son what happened. I told him I was wrong. And then we went out for a walk, and we saw this woman struggling with her groceries. This time, I didn't wait. I helped. My son helped. She cried. She said she hadn't had anyone do something like that in years. Keanu's face softened. Sounds like you made a choice. The man nodded. You reminded me it's not about being a hero. It's about not looking away. They talked for almost an hour. Before leaving, the man asked if he could write something. In the leather notebook, Keanu handed it over, and the man wrote, "Yesterday I was a bystander. Today I was a neighbor. I don't ever want to go back." Keanu closed the notebook carefully. "It's going to matter to someone else," he said. Later that week, Ellen's team called again. "The audience wants you back," the producer told him. "People are still talking about your last visit." Keanu agreed, but this time he brought the notebook on stage. Under the warm studio lights, he read out a few entry stories of strangers helping strangers, of moments when people chose to act instead of walk away. When he reached the man's entry, Keanu paused. "This," he said to the audience, "is proof that kindness moves forward. One choice leads to another. And sometimes, all it takes is seeing one person care to remind you that you can too." The room was silent for a moment before the applause began. Not the loud, forced clapping of a segment break, but the kind that came from a place deeper than entertainment. Ellen herself looked moved, her earlier tone of teasing long gone. "Keanu," she said, "you turned a joke about the subway into a movement about kindness." Keanu smiled faintly. "It's not my movement. It belongs to everyone who decides to look up and see each other again." When he left the studio that day, he didn't feel like he'd changed the world. But he knew he had helped people remember the part of it that was worth saving. And for him, that was enough.